right now. If you just recently joined us, welcome. We will be getting underway here very shortly. Thanks. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome. This is your first time coming to one of our YouthMappers events. Welcome. We're glad you're here. If you've been here before, then welcome back. My name is Richard Hinton, and I'm the manager of the YouthMappers Validation Hub. And today we are going to be taking you through a session on using JOSM. So if you've never used JOSM editor for OSM, then this is a great spot to start. Okay, it's a very powerful editor that you can use. There's a lot of cool tools. We're going to go through some of those today. And if you've never used it, but that's fine. We're going to walk you through that today. The session today will run about an hour and a half, so we'll finish up in about an hour and a half's time. way it will run is that the presenters will present some slides, and then they will follow some demo in JOSM itself. So you're welcome to follow along with that. And then, pardon me, if you have questions as we move through, please post them to the chat. So as the presentation is going on, the rest of the Hub members will be going through the chat, trying to address questions as quickly as we can and as accurately as we can. But as well, there'll be times during the presentation where the presenters will pause, and then if you wish to pose a question at that time, you're welcome to do so. Okay. So again, we will we'll get going very shortly, but right before we do, I would like the members of the Hub to briefly introduce themselves. And let me stop the share right now. Let me go back here. So, Kayla, you do a brief introduction for yourself, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Kayla. I am a member of the YouthMappers Hub. I'm a senior here at GW studying environmental studies and geography and GIS. And thank you for coming.
Awesome, thank you, Kayla. Naza.
Hi everyone, I'm Naza. I'm a junior here at the George Washington University. I'm studying environmental science, and I've been with the Hub for a couple months now.
Excellent. Going across the top of my screen here, SB.
Hi everyone, my name is SB. I am a second-year graduate student at George Washington University, and I have been part of the YouthMappers Validation Hub for a few months now.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Flora.
Hi everyone, my name is Flora, and I am a junior at the George Washington University as well, and I study geography and political science.
Fantastic. So we'll get started shortly. Both Kayla and Flora will be the leaders of the instructors today. A couple of things about this presentation. This is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you later on our YouthMappers channel. And as well, the presentation slides that will be used will also be made available to everybody. Everybody that's been registered for this particular training session. So you'll have access to all these materials. So no need to worry about that. As we're getting going here, it's great to see so many different people on the call today. In the chat, you can go ahead and say hi and where you're dialing in from today, so we get to sort of see what kind of global reach we have on this day. So with that, I think I will be quiet and step back and hand the reins over to Kayla and Flora to lead the presentation. You guys, thanks.
All right, thank you, Richard. So I will start the presentation. Like Richard said, we are the YouthMappers Validation Hub. And so today we're just going to give an introduction to JOSM. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kayla. So we're going to start with just an overview of what JOSM is. So JOSM stands for Java OpenStreetMap Editor, and it's very similar to the ID editor that you use on OSM, but it runs on your desktop. And what's nice about it is that it runs on all operating systems. So it runs on Windows, Mac, Linux, and you can download it onto your computer, and then you can use it offline. So what that means is that you get your data from the server, and then you edit it offline, and then you can push it back onto the server. So it's linked that way. The interface is a little bit intimidating, at least it was for me at the start, but that's what this training is for. And you'll see that once you get more familiar with the tools, it's actually a very efficient workflow, and there's great shortcuts and plugins that you can use. Next slide, please. Thank you. So like I said, this is the slightly intimidating interface, but we'll get more into what you're working with later on, but this is what it looks like once you're using JOSM. Next slide, please. So here we're just comparing the ID editor and JOSM. And like we said, JOSM can be a lot more efficient. Here you can see how much faster it is to map buildings, for example. In the ID editor, you have to map each node individually of the building. and then you have to square it and do all these extra steps, whereas JOSM does that all automatically with the buildings plugin. So it's a lot quicker and a lot more fun also, actually. Yeah, next slide, please. And another great thing about JOSM is that it's open source, which means that there's a lot of forums and a lot of guides on the internet that are all accessible and all free to help you as you're learning how to use it and if you're troubleshooting with any issues. And like Richard said, this presentation will be made available, and so then you can just get all these links later on. Next slide, please. So now we're going to walk you through the installation process of JOSM. Next slide, please. So since it is a Java OpenStreetMap, it's a Java-based editor. So you will need Java in order to have JOSM. So this is the first step. You can download Java for free online. This is the link that you can use. But it's very important that you get Java first because it runs most of the back-end processing of JOSM. So that's the first step. Next slide, please. The next step is then, once you've downloaded Java, is to download JOSM. All the links are in the presentation, like we said, but it's important to get the newest version and to update frequently. There's pretty regular updates that fix bugs or that added new features. So it's important to stay up to date with that to make sure that you have the best mapping experience. Next slide, please. So now, we'll walk you through the JOSM interface. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is when you first open JOSM for the very first time. This is what it will look like. Like we said, it works on offline data. So it's synced by the user. So you download the data, you work on it, and then you upload it back onto the server. But this is just the first page that you see when you open the site. It talks about updates, about new features, or about the OSM fundraiser as well, actually. Next slide, please. So, and you can follow along if you have JOSM open, you can follow along as I'm talking through this, but Kayla will also demonstrate this later on. So no pressure to write it all down right now. But the first step, obviously, when you have downloaded JOSM is to authorize your account. So this links your JOSM to your OSM account so that the data can be pushed back onto the OSM server. So the way that you do that is you go to Edit and then to Preferences. And then in the connection setting, you can click Authorize Now, and there you will have to put in your login details, so your username and your password. And then when you click on Authorize Now, it will allow you to have these two accounts linked. Sorry, the accounts linked. Just make sure to be aware that the interface that we are showing here on this little animation, it might look different if you are using a Mac, but actually Kayla will be using a Mac in her demo, so then you can see both versions. But keep the preferences window open because we're going to be working through other setups in the preferences window. Next slide, please. So the next step is remote control. This serves as a link between the OSM server and JOSM, so what happens locally on your computer. So again, you stay within the preferences window that you access through Edit and then Preferences, and then you select Remote Control Settings, and then you check Enable Remote Control, and then you click OK. And again, you keep the preferences window open so that we can do one more thing to set up your JOSM. Next slide, please. So the last step is downloading plugins, and then you will be ready to use JOSM. But the last step is to download plugins, which really is one of JOSM's best features. It is the fact that you can download these plugins. So within the preferences window, you will want to click on the plugin icon, which looks like this puzzle piece on the right, this blue puzzle piece. And then there's three main plugins that we use. It's the Buildings plugin, the Utils plugin, and the Mapathoner plugin. So you have to search for them in the little search bar, and then they will pop up one by one, but you want to select them all and then you can select download list, and that will install the plugins onto your JOSM, and then you will be able to use them. These plugins might need updates later on, but JOSM will always inform you if your plugins are out of date and need an update. Next slide, please. And this again is to show you the interface. So this is what the interface actually looks like. You have the main map view, which is this large black square in the middle. This is where the mapping and the editing takes place, similar to the ID editor, but this is where the downloaded data will show up. The editing tools on the left, these contain the drawing tools or the selection tools. At the top, you have the main menu. This you can customize depending on what plugins you have, but this is where most of the options are. And then you have the shortcut toolbar right underneath, and on the right you have information panels. This one is very helpful if you're adding tags or keys to your what you have mapped, or if you want to select layers on your map and you want to hide or show certain layers depending on what imagery you're working with. So the information panel is very important, but it's also customizable. So yes, and I will now pass it on to Kayla, who will demonstrate what I just explained. Thank you, Kayla.
Laura, so yeah, I will be doing the demo over in JOSM. So like what Flora said before, this is the interface that you first see when you get into JOSM. You'll see you should update. I don't know if that's always there or I really do need to update. But I'll first show you how to get in. It looks like I have already signed into JOSM through my OpenStreetMap account, so it might not let me switch, or at least from the instructions that we got. But just again, it is to go to Edit, Preferences, Connections, and then Authorize and Accept Access. So when you're doing that yourself, hopefully you'll be able to log in a little bit more seamlessly. For me, my account is already in there. But moving on, I'm going to show you how to install plugins. So in JOSM up here in the upper left-hand corner, you will go to Preferences, and then you'll see all these different icons. And like Flora said before, the plugins setting is here where you see that little blue puzzle piece. And so again, these plugins are super helpful while mapping with JOSM. Some of the ones that I use about every day are the Buildings tool, the Mapathon tool, Utils tool plugin. So for example, if I was to put in the Buildings tool, Buildings here. So imagine I didn't have it. I would press on that and I would download it, and it would download in, and then I would hit OK. And then later on, when I'm showing you how to use the Buildings tool, we'll get into that. But I'll also show you how to use remote or access remote control. So again, I go to Preferences, and I look for the remote control icon, and that is down a little bit. It is this icon down here. So it looks like a little remote control. Again, imagine I didn't have it. I would then enable remote control. Again, press OK. And remote control is super helpful because if you're used to using ID editor, there is a menu. If you go to the bottom of, I believe, the instructions tab, especially on hot or teach, if you're familiar with those, where you can switch into JOSM. And this allows you to seamlessly switch over, and it brings all the data so you can upload and download easily between the two. And now we're going to go back to the presentation, and I'll tell you guys a little bit about mapping features. So again, we're going to go through this in a demo, but for downloading OSM data, you'll go into File, Download from OSM, or you can click this button here, And both these download information from openstreetmap.org. And then you'll be able to download that data from something called SlippyMap, and that will show up when you download from OSM. You can drag the world, basically just map, and zoom in to an area that you want to map. For example, we're going to look at one of my hometowns and then also DC. And you're going to download that at the bottom of the window. And JOSM will get an area from OpenStreetMap and you'll open it in your window for editing. And also you can download straight from OSM, and I'll show you how to do that as well. And you basically use the same process that you did with the Slippy map. You will go into OSM, and that's openstreetmap.org, and you'll zoom into the area that you want to map. See, in this map down here, you see a couple buildings, a couple roads, but maybe in the satellite imagery, there's more there that you need to add to the map. That's an example of why you would bring it in. You would copy that URL, and then in the second part, you would put it into OSM by going to File, Open Location, and then in this drop-down download location menu, you will paste the URL into this text box. All right, and then next up is imagery setup. So what that does when you download the data, it means that you're downloading the road features, the building outlines, the residential areas, but you're not getting the imagery when you download that always right away. So you'll need to load the imagery into JOSM. There's a couple different imagery sets that you can use. There's Bing, there's Esri Worldview, Mapbox. For different tasks, they'll ask you to use different imagery because maybe that's the imagery that they first started mapping with. So the buildings are going to be most aligned with that imagery. Again, you're going to want to check the imagery instructions and select the correct imagery layer from the drop-down menu. Next up is when you've downloaded data into JOSM, you can activate and deactivate visibility of any layer. So if you look at my mouse, in this panel, in the layers section, there's a little eye, and I'll show you that, highlight it again once we do the demo, but you can select these and deselect them. So for example, if you want to take away the imagery, but you don't want to delete it, you can simply just press that visibility layer and you can have it go away, but then you can press it again and it'll come back up. Yeah, and you can increase or decrease its transparency. Maybe you only want to see the imagery a little bit, so on. Also, going more into that imagery visibility, it can be helpful to adjust the visibility of your imagery layers in JOSM. It can be adjusted by increasing or decreasing these different aspects like opacity, colorfulness, gamma, and blurred. Gamma, for example, tends to make features pop out in the landscape, and it is also good practice to compare imagery sources when you're mapping. Additional layers can be added by selecting them from the imagery menu. All right, so now I'm going to go back to JOSM, and I'm going to show you Slippy Map, JOSM, moving around, and visibility. So like I said before, and you're welcome to follow along if you have JOSM open, this is that drop-down menu to download data in from, and this is what Slippy Map looks like. So this is a map of Abu Dhabi. I'm going to download that into JOSM. I press download. Then you're going to see the OSM data that other users have used. And to add the imagery, actually, we'll get into that in a second. First, I also want to show you another way you can do it. Like I said about the URL that you can use. So I'm going to go out and into OpenStreetMaps really quick. So this is DC. this is at least where GW campus is. I'm going to copy that URL and I'm going to bring it into JOSM and let me do this slowly so you can see. I'm going to press open location. And that's going to bring up that text box menu where you can put the URL in. I'm going to paste that in, download the URL, and that's going to show me all the information for the location that I had in OpenStreetMap. So this is the data that was in that area. And then I want to see the imagery for it. So I'm going to use Bing aerial imagery and I'm going to bring that in. And it takes a second to load, but then it brings in the satellite imagery so you can see what's really here. And for example, this area, maybe because GW is a member of YouthMappers, or it's just because it's DC, is very well mapped. There's so many features here. But yeah, so you'll be able to move around. I have a Mac, so it's a little bit harder, but I also came with a mouse today. So to move around, you can right click on your mouse and you can just move around the map like this. You can also zoom in and out using I forget what this is called, but zooming out using the little mouse. This thing. And move around like that. Also, to change visibility, I will click on this eye, and that will show me those imagery aspects. So if I want to increase gamma, that's what happens. Decrease, that's what happens. This is not the best location to use that on, but for example, if you're somewhere mapping in a desert region where the buildings and the ground look pretty similar, that's super helpful. And I also just quickly want to show you again how to be able to separate visibility just quickly, but not delete it completely. So go up to this layers menu and you will see these eyes. And I know they're quite small, but if you press on them, it takes away the imagery just for a minute, and then you can press on it again and it'll come back. So that can be super helpful when you are mapping a region. And with that, that is things that we talked about. I'm going to go back to the slideshow. All right, and now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about JOSM basic operations, editing and creating objects. And Flora, I believe I hand this off to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Kayla, for the demo. So we're going to get into the editing operations, so how to create objects within JOSM. So very similar to how it works on OSM. When we're editing in JOSM, we just add points and lines and shapes, and these represent the real life locations. We use the draw tool to draw these objects, and then we describe them by selecting things from the presets menu. It's important to not map outside of your area. So if you look at the example image below, you're only supposed to map the areas that are clear and not the areas where there are diagonal lines. Next slide, please. So as Kayla already mentioned, the basic navigation is like so. The right mouse button allows you to drag the map, and then the left mouse button allows you to manipulate an element, so you can select it or move it. And then with the scroll wheel, you can zoom in and out. And again, this is a bit different if you're using a Mac, as it depends on what settings you've set up for your trackpad. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the basic operations, there's three main operations. The selection operation that you can also have by clicking on the S key of your keyboard. This is for selecting elements to view their tags or to edit their tags and for moving them as well. Then you have the adding tool. This is to add elements, nodes or ways or areas. And then you have the delete tool. This is for deleting elements, but there's also definitely tools that you can use to fix either what you have mapped or what other people have mapped. And that way you can improve the mapping by also preserving the history of the item. So you don't have to delete it and create a new one, but you can keep it. But we'll get into that later on. Next slide, please. So the basic elements in JOSM are similar to the basic elements in OSM or in GIS in general. It's just the terminology that's a bit different. So we have nodes, which are dots just used to mark specific locations. And they're just points in space. And each node obviously has a latitude and a longitude. And so these are the sets of coordinates that determine where it is. And then an ordered list of nodes is a way. So this is the same as a line segment, more or less. And these are used to describe roads or paths or fences or anything of that nature. And the last one is a closed way or an area. And this is this can also be referred to as a polygon. So these are closed ways which go in a closed loop. So the first point is the same as the last point, more or less. And then these are used to describe areas like parks or like islands, or most commonly like buildings. Next slide, please. So to draw a standalone node, it's very simple. You have to make sure that you have nothing selected. So you can either go to selection and then unselect all, or you can just press the escape button on your keyboard. But you have to press A, which, as I said earlier, is the tool that you use to add things to the map. And then you select draw nodes, and then you can begin drawing on your map, depending on where you want to put it. But you just have to double click, and then you have created your node. And then you return to the selection mode, and that's then when you can manipulate what you have just mapped. Next slide, please. And drawing away or a path is very similar. You press using your left mouse click. So you press somewhere, and then you just have to press on another location, and then that will connect the two dots, and it will automatically go in the direction that you're already connecting the points. Keep pressing if your path or your way has multiple nodes in it, and then if you want to finish your path, you will just double click, and then to stop, you go back to the select mode, or you press S. Or you can also press the escape button. Like, there's many different options. I usually just double click because I'm already clicking anyways, so that makes it very intuitive. But yeah, there's all these options. Next slide, please. So this is specifically on mapping roads, which is the same as drawing away. So the slide that I just had earlier, the only thing is that when you're mapping roads, you will also add keys and values, so basically preset tags. But you will do it the same way. So you activate the draw tool by selecting A, and then you trace the road, as you can see here on the animation that we have on the right. And then when you're finished, you double click on the final point, and that will be it. It's important to add a tag. So you can do this by pressing Alt and A, and then you want to enter key equals highway, but we'll get into what keys are in the next slides. But make sure to check the project instructions or a road tagging wiki, which kind of explains to you what value to add it, but it will most likely be residential or unclassified. And you can edit the tag for a road by hitting Alt and S. So this is just what you will do to describe what you have mapped. Next slide, please. And similarly, when you're mapping land use, after you're done mapping your area, so you do it the same way that you would map a road, except that you want to finish the loop. So you finish the shape by clicking on the original point that you have mapped, and you can see it on this animation on the right. You want to tag this feature by selecting the Add button within the Tags window, or you can also click Alt-A like you did earlier for mapping roads. And there, the key will be land use, and the value can be of different things. It could be residential, it could be other things, but it's important that you put key as land use, which is kind of the more general classification. But we'll get into what tags are on the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So tags are what we use to describe what we map in OpenStreetMap. So they're a pairing of keys and of a key and a value. A key is a more general classification of the feature. So like I said earlier, that will be something like key equals highway or key equals land use. And then the value is the more specific term within the key. So that could be like a residential highway or residential land use, things like that. They're lowercase and they don't include spaces. They will use underscore instead to denote a space. Next slide, please. This is just another slide to explain how to add a tag or a preset. You can click on the Add button, which Kayla will show later on, but the Add Values window will appear, and there you can select a key and a value from the drop-down list. And what's nice about the drop-down list is that it contains all the values possible in the area that you have downloaded from OSM and all the known tags or the presets that you could have. Next slide, please. So when we, so like I said earlier, the pre-existing tags can also be found in the presets menu, as you see here. You will go to, at the top toolbar of your JOSM, you will go under presets, and then it will show you all the different possibilities that you have. So in this example, we see man-made and then tower. But Kayla will demonstrate this now. And I just wanted to say as well that if you have any questions, and I see that the chat is asking questions already, but feel free to put them in the chat and we'll do our best to address them as we go along. But yes, thank you. I'll move it on to Kayla now.
Thank you guys, and thank you, Flora, for that. Okay, so going back into JOSM, first of all, I'm not gonna continue to map DC. It's a little bit crowded. Instead, I will map an area in Costa Rica because it's a little bit less mapped, and it'll be easier to work with when I'm showing you these instructions. Okay, so I'm downloading that layer in, and because I already was in JOSM, I already have the imagery in there. So we're going to go over some basic navigation, adding nodes, selecting nodes, deleting nodes, drawing lines and roads, tagging schemas, and land use. So once again, and this is called the scroll wheel. I learned that. Thank you, Flora. We can zoom in by that scroll wheel, zooming in, scrolling down, and we can move around by hitting the right mouse pad and dragging it, and we can manipulate items by pressing on our left tab, and I can take this building and I can move it around, but that's somebody else's work, so I'm gonna undo that. First, I'm gonna show you guys how to add a node. So I'm gonna get out of this selection because if I press add node now, it might add on to that building, which I don't want. So I'm pressing the escape button on my keyboard. Next, I am gonna press, and these are shortcuts, by the way. Shortcuts are, super helpful while using JOSM. And it'll make things a lot easier. And as you become more familiar with JOSM, you'll pick it up more and more, but right now I know we're throwing a lot of stuff at you. To draw a node, which can also turn into what Flora was talking about of a way, you select A on your keyboard, and then you'll see this kind of cross appear, and then you press once. Or sorry, you just press and then press escape, and then that will create that node. So if I press S, which means select, I can see that this is a node. Obviously that isn't actually a feature, so I'm gonna get rid of that just by pressing Command Z. But I'll show you guys how. Oh, actually, let me show you how to delete as well. So I've created this node. I'm gonna hit that S button, which means select on my keyboard, and then I'm gonna select that node, and I delete by going to. Sometimes it takes me a sec to get to edit, and then I see that delete button, and there's also a shortcut to just hit delete on your computer, but my Mac doesn't allow me to do that. So I go to edit, delete, and it'll delete that node. So super helpful. Most of the time, honestly, when you're not on a Mac, these shortcuts work a lot better. But now I want to show you guys how to draw lines and roads, so different ways. I go back into the way feature by selecting A on my keyboard. Again, it brings me to that cross, and I want to create a road right here. So I'm gonna find where this road starts. I see it's like about there, and I'm gonna click on where it intersects with this road. And I'm gonna, once I click once, it's gonna create a line like this, and I'll be able to move it around in any direction I want. But if I were to just do the beginning of the line and the end of the line, you kind of miss some of the geometry. So instead, I'm gonna click where it curves, and it's gonna add another node, and I'm gonna click along that line. And once I've gotten to the end of the road, I will double click with my left mouse, and it finishes it off. Although, if I was to leave it like that, it would create an error because it's not tagged. So how I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna get out of the way command on my keyboard by pressing S, and I'm gonna select this road. And here in the right-hand panel, you'll see tags and memberships. And this is super important because when people are using this data, they're gonna need to see what is that feature. So there's different tagging schemas, and there's a bunch of wikis to see, depending on what area, different tagging, how you should tag it, what those will look like. So in my opinion, well, it's a highway, first of all, because it's a road. I go to add under tags and memberships, and under key, I'm gonna find highway. I can also search it up. I see highway. And then under highway, there's a bunch of different highways that you can choose from. But I believe that this is residential. So this is important because not only are you saying it's a kind of road, but specifically we use highways, but you're saying it's a residential highway or road. So after that, I'm gonna hit OK, and then that's gonna show up as a highway residential. And an even more advanced part of the tagging schema is if you have local knowledge, you can even put in the name. So for example, if I wanted to put name, and then name equals, and then whatever the name is. But I guess that's when you have a better sense of JOSM and how it works, or if you have local knowledge. So lastly, in this part of the demo, I'm going to show you land use. So for example, maybe I think that this is a residential area. Typically these buildings would be mapped, but this is a kind of undermapped region. So imagine there. And how I would start creating that land use area is making it a way, and that way is going to connect. And I do that by, again, selecting A on my keyboard, and then essentially clicking around this land use, and I'm gonna call this land use residential because it looks like a residential area where people live. Maybe it's farmland. I don't necessarily know, but I'm gonna show you this example by calling this residential. And I finish it up by double clicking on the point I started with, and that will turn this into a polygon. So again, I'm going out of the way command on my keyboard by selecting S, and it selects this polygon, and I'm gonna add. And in the tagging schema or the key, I'm gonna go to, and just to let you know too, there's so many different keys that you can select from. So right now we're just teaching you the buildings, highways, and land use keys. But as you get more advanced, and even in the advanced JOSM training, I believe we'll go over more advanced tagging. So I'm gonna put in land use, and it is residential. So I'll hit OK, and then now I'll see that this is a residential area, and it'll even show up kind of filled. And I can still add stuff within that. For example, I'll show you how to add a building within this, and it won't affect the polygon that I've made. But yeah, that is at least the demo for the past few things we covered. And now we'll get into some JOSM shortcuts and plugins. So the next part we're gonna cover is more about buildings and how to create those polygons. So this is a shortcut, and if you guys remember from the section where we talked about plugins, I showed you how to install the buildings plugin. And what that does is when you are able to select B from your keyboard, you activate the building tool, and that makes making buildings so much easier rather than essentially making it from away, like the land use polygon I just made. This will just perfectly create a squared polygon, which is important for buildings because most buildings are squared. They have right angles. If you look around your room right now, if you're in a room, you can see that it's typically squared. So we want to keep the data we create similar to that. And luckily the building tool does that automatically for us. So how to use that is by selecting B on your keyboard, and then you left click at the corner of a building and keep your mouse pressed down. You move the pointer along the longest edge of the building and release the corner. Then you can adjust the depth until it fits and left click to finish the shape. And again, the building tool automatically squares and tags your building. So then you also don't need to add a tag to say building equals yes, but I'm going to show you how to do that anyways. Okay. A lot of the time you will also get L, U, or T-shaped buildings. So if you see this video playing, you'll see how there's an extrusion from the building. And so you're going to use the same process by mapping the longest edge and then stopping around here because it's just at the extrusion. And then you are going to select X on your keyboard, and you're going to double click on where that extrusion is, and you'll drag and it'll create a point that separates the two lines. So then you can drag the line out, and it will extend until it fits the footprint of the building. Next is circular buildings. So this is while you're still in building mode. So again, you'll hit B on your keyboard, and then you can switch into the circle mode of the building tool by hitting Alt-Z. And if anyone is using a Mac while doing this, you'd press Option-Z. Then, like this video is showing, you trace the diameter of the circular building, and it'll automatically create a perfectly tagged circular building. You can also switch back to the rectangle building mode by selecting Alt-R in your keyboard. And Additionally, if you are doing this and forget to put it in building mode, you can also do this by being in the way mode, which is A. You map the diameter and then you press O, and that will also make your building circular, but it won't tag it as a building. So if you're creating specifically a building that's circular, it's best to use this method, and I'll show it in the demo as well. Okay, so this is for courtyards or any space that has an empty space in the middle. You're basically merging a bunch of polygons together. So to walk you through, I know it kind of maybe looks a little bit confusing, but I'll walk you through it slowly. So you are essentially going to make 4 different polygons. So on one side, you draw a rectangular building shape, and then you select that building and the first building that you've traced, and then reselect B and trace the remaining sides of the building, and then select them all again by hitting S and Shift. That will allow you to select multiple buildings at once, and then you'll hit Shift plus J to merge the 4 buildings that you've created into one. And again, we'll do a walkthrough on that. Also, fixing buildings. So sometimes you'll see that the orientation is off in the building, maybe the size is off, or maybe even buildings touch one another. So if you see an unsquared building, first of all, like I said, the importance of squaring buildings in JOSM is pretty big, because we want to encourage mappers to map what buildings are like in real life, so we can get a better sense of just spatially understanding what different places are like. So you can do that by pressing Q on your keyboard, and if you need to rotate or resize a building, you will press Shift Control to rotate, or resize by pressing Control Alt or Control Option if you're on a map. Finally, buildings can be disconnected from other features by hitting G on your keyboard where the nodes are connected. All right, so now I'll go into this demo. Oh, my bad. Let's find where we left off first. Okay. All right, so if we're to use this example again, first I'll show you how to create a building. So if you guys remember, that is hitting B on your keyboard. So I'm going to press B, and you see how it kind of turns into that cross again, but now we're in building tool, so it has that little building feature to it. So I'm going to start at one corner, and I'm going to go along the longest edge, and I'll stop at the other one. I'll click it again, and then it'll allow me to extrude the shape of it, and I'll click again, and I'll create that building. So now you can see if I select it, it shows the key as building equals yes, which is what we want. So for example, if I were to create a building not using building tool, using the way tool, I could select the parts of the building, and I'm going to purposely make this unsquared, show you how to square later. So this is kind of how it would look like. You would double click on the last node. So now I'm going into my selection tool, I'm selecting it. You see how it's not tagged. I'll quickly show you. I want it to equal building equals yes. Building equals yes. And that's kind of the basic way that we're supposed to tag buildings when we don't have local knowledge of them. Building equals yes. Okay. And then jumping forward to squaring that building, I'm sure you guys remember that is hitting Q on your keypad. So I'm going to show you one more time. Hit Q and it squares all the building. Also, you can rotate or resize these buildings. So if I press Shift Control, or actually I think it might be Shift Command for Mac at least, then I'm able to rotate the building. So maybe like I went into JOSM and I saw a building look like that. I would press it and I would hit Shift Command and I would rotate it to the correct orientation. I can also resize it by hitting, okay, for Mac it is Control Alt or Control Option, but for my Mac at least it is Command Option. I can resize it like that. But that looked good, and then I'll put it in like that. Okay. Also sometimes you can have buildings that are connected through one node. And so you can see that this node is connected, and then if I'm trying to move the buildings, I'll have an issue because they'll be connected. If you see, it kind of creates a little issue. So to deconnect them, you hit that node that is connecting the two, and usually that node is a little bit bigger from the rest of them. You're going to select that, and you're going to hit G on your keyboard. Again, we're going to have a shortcut image that will help you at the end. So then they're disconnected. And that's super helpful, especially when validating. You'll see a lot that are connected. So I just put that over another building that I saw and resized that. Okay, lastly, to make a courtyard. So I don't see anything that really looks like a courtyard in my residential area, at least. So we're going to imagine there is a building with a courtyard coming off this building. Okay, so I'm gonna go in my building mode, hitting the edges of this building. Believe that's a driveway. So I'll hit that. Then I'm gonna select this building, because when I select the building and I continue to build, it creates buildings with the same angles. So if you see, even if I was to create a building over here, it would be at the same angle as the other one, but that's not the example I'm showing you. So I'm gonna create a building with a courtyard. So I'm gonna create 4 polygons. Oh, okay. So once you've created your 4 polygons, you're gonna go to the selection button, and you're gonna, for Mac at least, you pressed Command to select multiple things. So I'm already in the selection mode. This building is selected, and then I'm also gonna select this building, and this building. And then to merge all of them together, I'm gonna press Shift J, and that creates 1 polygon. And now you can see that it has a courtyard and there's no building in there. And again, it creates a multi-polygon building, and you don't need to tag it. I'm gonna undo that though, because it doesn't actually exist. All right, and thank you. That was the demo, and now I'm gonna hand it back off to Flora.
Thank you, Kayla, for the demo. We're also reaching near the end of our training. We're just going to go over some things of how to work with JOSM if you're working from a task, either within the hot tasking manager or within the Teach OSM manager. And then we'll look at uploading, and then we'll look at a couple more shortcuts, and then that will be the end. So make sure to put any of your questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to address them. But I'm going to talk about launching JOSM from a task. So before you do that, you have to make sure that JOSM is already running in the background. So you already have the application open on your computer. Then you'll find a project in the tasking manager that you're using. And at the task selection stage, in the editor pop-up menu, you'll want to make sure that JOSM is selected. So as you can see here, this is from the hot tasking manager, but on the screenshot that we have here, you won't want to select the ID editor, but you'll want to select JOSM. And then you can just click map selected task, and this will then launch in JOSM. If you go back to JOSM, it will have popped up in the map view. You can also change it to be your default editor. You'll do that within the tasking manager. You can just click on your username and go to the settings, and then you can change that. Next slide, please. Now you'll want to make sure to upload frequently. So it's usually around every 10 or so chain sets that you'll want to upload your data back onto the OSM server. Because remember, you edit the data locally on JOSM, and then you want to push the data back up onto the server. To do that, you want to click on the hard disk icon with an upward green arrow. So that's the one at the top left. It's right next to the download button. So one goes down, one goes up. You want to click on the upward one, or you can just click Control Shift and the up arrow. And this will bring up an upload pop-up window. And this is where you can add your chain set comments and any hashtags or any other information. And then you'll want to select upload the changes. But we'll get into a little bit more detail about the chain sets. Next slide, please. Exactly. So the window that appears, it will show you a list of the objects that you added or the objects that you changed or deleted. And it's always useful to go through them just to make sure maybe you deleted something by accident. So it's always good to just double check to make sure that the data that you're pushing back onto the server is accurate data. In the box at the bottom, you'll want to add a chain set comment that describes what you did. So this could be that you named some roads or you added some buildings. And this is important just to keep track of what's been done. And you might also want to add some hashtags if there are hashtags that are specific to the project or to an organization that you're working with. And then you'll want to specify your source. So this can be local knowledge, this could be Bing imagery, but it's important to tell people what imagery you used. And then just for your first upload, JOSM will ask you to enter your OpenStreetMap account details again. But that is, yes, but after that, it will just always be running. Next slide, please. Right, and once you've uploaded that, you can go to openstreetmap.org and you can actually move to the area that you edited, and then you can see the changes that they'll appear on the map. In case you don't see them, it might just take a couple of minutes for them to show up, but if you wait a bit, you'll see your first changes show up on the OpenStreetMap servers, so that's really cool. Next slide, please. This is a really helpful cheat sheet that I use a lot. It includes all the shortcuts that we've kind of talked about, and actually even more than what we talked about. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, or you'll have access to it later on as well, when we share the slideshow with you and the video presentation. But it's very helpful. I still use it to this day, even though I've gotten more familiar with JOSM and some of the shortcuts have become quite a habit. There are a lot that I still go back to this cheat sheet to check. So it's always nice to have this. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So that concludes the training presentation. And please, again, make sure to put in your questions into the chat. And we'll probably be online for more minutes to make sure to answer all your questions. But I'll hand it back over to Richard now to conclude the session.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Flora. Thank you, Kayla. That was awesome. As Flora was just mentioning, this is the sort of the end of the presentation part. But please let us know, is there some of the tools maybe you want to see shown again or reiterated or sort of explained again? Please just let us know. We're happy to hear. We're happy to answer them. We're here for, let's see, for another 25 minutes if needed. We have that time. As well as you're sort of formulating your questions, This presentation will be made available to everybody as soon as it's been processed, and you should get a notification from our communications folks that it is available to view, as well as the presentation slides themselves. They'll also be available for you guys to review, so you can have those as a reference to go back to as needed. So that's our presentation. If you have any questions, please let us know. Seeing some thank yous coming into the chat. You're very welcome. We're happy to do this. Oh, I should also mention our future trainings coming up. When you register for this one, obviously you saw the other two that are coming up. So next month we have our advanced JOSM training. So if you want to join that one, that'd be a great way to enhance those skills. Now you maybe refresh some of the basic skills you knew with JOSM or new to JOSM. Start using it regularly. Pardon me, is what I would recommend. And then you'll be well placed to attend the advanced JOSM, where we'll go into more tools and sort of the common tools that are you find very useful when editing an OSM. And then that's in October, and then in November we'll do one actually on validation. And the reason we do these trainings in this order, the intro to JOSM and then the advanced JOSM, is because pardon me, we use JOSM as a validation tool. Right, with that, I think to drink some water. I'm just so excited about JOSM because it's awesome. There's a question about other useful plugins. There's actually, that's the thing with JOSM, there are a literal ton of different plugins. Mapathoner is one. I don't know if you guys talked about Mapathoner today. I know we'll cover it in the advanced training. Mapathoner is one you can look up. It's a lot of fun, and it works really well. There's actually a lot of really cool plugins. I want to be interested to hear from the hub members on the call here about what is your favorite plugin?
I use another one, but this one it's not very, you won't use it a lot, but when you do use it, it's very helpful. It's Fast Draw. That's all in one word. And that's when you're drawing bendy features, like if you're drawing a forest, so you won't have to click every node individually of the area, but you can draw it the same way that you would draw with a pencil, and you just kind of outline it. That's Fast Draw. And then I'm not sure if I can think of any other ones, but maybe the other hub members have any.
When validating, I love Mapathoner, especially to find non-square buildings or any other errors within the task.
Good. Now, there SP, you guys have favorite plugins that you like to use?
Yeah, mine is also Mapathoner for both validating and for mapping, just because of the ease of how you can create so many buildings all at once. So, yeah.
It's pretty slick, yeah.
I'd also probably say Mapathoner. I think that's the go-to for many of us, especially when validating as well.
Yeah, no, it's quite the handy tool. Whoever created that did a brilliant job making it very useful. Very useful tool. And we'll cover Mapathoner in more detail in our advanced training, and along with a number of other things and sort of tips and tricks and cool things you can do to really sort of bring your editing skills to a higher level. Any other questions or queries? Put those in there. So there's another question here. When we digitize a building and we are not sure that it is a building because the image is blurry, because the building shape is not common, what do you suggest? That's a good question. Imagery issues basically is what it comes down to. And we're trying to trace buildings, but we see what we think is a building, but we're not sure it is a building because of the shape, maybe a little wonky. I tend to err on the side of being more conservative. And if I don't know the area, I don't have clear enough imagery to make a solid determination that that is a building, then I won't draw it. But be sure to use all of some visual clues you have. Use other imagery that are available to see if something shows up a little differently. Look for shadows, straight lines, things like this that will sort of indicate that this is a a structure and is in fact a building. But if you really cannot determine it, it may just be like an outcrop of rocks or dry soil or something like that, or a collection of debris on the ground or something. I would be conservative and not map it and leave it to someone who knows the area to map it, or when there is better imagery, you can clearly see that, oh, that is in fact a building and not just a stack of debris of some sort. Good question. Anybody else? We're all ears. We're all ears. No? All right, well, if there are no more questions, then what we'll do is we'll bring this to a close. I'm going to stop recording.